Hey guys, King's Indian defense is a hyper-modern opening. Black invites white to control the center, hoping they create some spaces in their position, and black counterattacks early in the middle game. It's good for all levels, and it has been played by legends like Nakamura or Kasparov. Some of the advantages of playing King's Indian defense are: 1. It's a strong variation versus Queen's Pawn. It can be played either in a tournament or a bullet game. 2. It's very versatile. You can play it against London system, English opening, or even King's Pawn. In this case we call it perk defense, but it's the same development. So basically there is nothing white can do to stop your King's Indian setup. It's like you're learning one opening against anything white can play. 3. It gets even more interesting when we mention that you can also play a King's Indian setup as white, so you learn a new opening for both white and black. 4. When you play King's Indian defense, you will have a dynamic, entertaining, and active play. And number 5, you can think of King's Indian defense as a system or a scheme to develop pieces and a set of ideas for the middle game. This means that in general you won't have to learn many variations or a specific order of the moves when you play it. In this video we are gonna learn how to play against the 3 main systems white can try versus King's Indian defense, and I included Masters games so you get ideas for the middle game. Also, we're gonna see typical tactics that can happen in King's Indian defense and some live games where I tried this line. After watching this video, you will understand King's Indian defense and will be able to play it and win games with it. Let's get started. So we have King's Indian defense on the board after the moves d4, knight f6, c4, and g6. Although the next couple of moves are almost always played, so we can say knight c3, bishop g7, e4, and d6. We're going to focus on this moment. Here white can play 3 main systems, and they are Saemisch, this move f3 protecting the central pawn. Also they can try f4, and this is the 4 pawns attack, very aggressive. And finally we're going to analyze the line knight f3 followed by bishop e2 and castling with a more or less normal development. That's the classical variation. Also there are other ways to play as white like fianchetto or Averbach, but they are much less frequently played. So let's start with Saemisch f3, a very solid system against King's Indian. Here we are going to castle and white plays bishop e3. Saemisch is a really interesting system for white against King's Indian. The good news is that we have many ways and many options to play against it. So for example, we can play with the plan of the break over e5. We can play with the plan of a break over c5, or also we can play with some ideas with breaking over b5, maybe after a6, sometimes c6, sometimes rook b8 and b5. Also we can connect the break over b5 with some of the other breaks over e or c5, so we have many options. I really like this plan where we break over c5. I think it's one of the best ways to play against Saemisch. The idea here is that we are trying to make white advance, so we open the diagonal, and the Indian bishop is going to be very powerful once we get that. Also we get an interesting square here on e5. So in general the game can continue with, for example, knight e2. Maybe you're looking at the pawn hanging here. Usually this pawn is not really getting too much for white. I mean, they can take it, it's a pawn for free actually, but there will be a very good compensation in these positions after queen takes and bishop takes e5. Black just plays knight c6, and these positions are usually very well. There's a lot of compensation and a very dynamic play for black pieces. The compensation is the bishop on the great diagonal, the rook on the on the open file, and also the development. Observe, white king is still in the center and white pieces are totally undeveloped. This rook is far from going to d1, and there is already an open file over here, a half open file here, so there will be a lot of pressure in the next moves. So the compensation, as I was saying, is usually clear in this line. So after c5, a normal move for white is probably, or a more common move for white is knight g e2, and then we can continue here knight c6, increasing the pressure again. Sometimes, or very often, white will need to advance the pawn, and then we go with a knight to e5. The idea is that if there is some f4, our knight can always go to g4, creating some problems, trying to get that bishop. And if there is any issue with the knight, there is always h6 available, so the knight is never actually going to be captured. So these positions are fine. Observe the bishop, the diagonal is already open for the bishop, and one of the most interesting plans is to break over b5, probably after a6 rook b8. But also something interesting is the plan of advancing the h pawn, like h5, h4, because this knight has to move very often to g3, so they can develop the bishop, and it can be annoying the advance of that pawn on the king side. Also, there is some pressure here on c4. We should say that the evaluation of this position is like on clear play. I found this interesting example where after a Saemisch variation, black broke on e5. They tried this line of the rake over here, and after d5, now this is more or less what we wanted, because now there is a nice square here on c5. In these positions, we are going to try to bring the knight to that square, sometimes over d7 or sometimes over a6, and at some point we will be playing a5, so white cannot try anything over b4. Also, very often we want to fight against the most advanced central pawn, and breaks like e6 or c6 are going to be very typical. So the next move in this game was c6. So queen d2 was played, there was a trade in the center, and then this move a6, trying to expand on the queen side. White castled queen side, then knight bd7 first, and after king b1, then this move b5. Observe, we are creating interesting squares here for our knights on c4 and c5. So plans like knight c5 or knight b6, knight c4 are very normal. And remember, we have another knight over here, so we can use it as well for these maneuvers. In the game g4, knight c5, h4. Remember, we are here in opposite side castlings, so both players will try to attack on the side where the enemy king is, and the first player opening the position and actually attacking is going to be winning. In the game, black played queen a5, very normal move, putting the queen on that side of the board. Bishop g2, which is very dubious because it's very slow. Bishop d7 develops, connects the rooks because they are going to come over b and c files, and then h5, rook fc8, open file on c, knight h3, and then rook a b8. Observe, the rook is on the same line as the king. This doesn't seem to be so important because there are some pieces in the middle, but you will see it's going to be essential in what happened later in the game. So h takes g6, h takes g6, and then knight e2, trying to trade queens because the attack looks really strong over there. However, black played hero b4, avoiding that trade. The best move for white here is rook c1, trying to fight for the file and trying to trade some pieces over there. But in the game, they just played knight c1, and this is a bad move. The next move in this game is really interesting and is really special, and it is this knight a4. The knight is getting closer, is attacking b2, but more importantly is controlling c3. So the idea here is that now there are some tactics with the knight going over there, so they can recapture with the b pawn, and then the b file is going to be open and the attack could be decisive. And also with the discovered, the queen could be hanging. For example, after a normal move like knight j5, we can play knight c3 check, and if there is a capture, well, we recapture, and this is a discovered, and we're getting the queen. Well, in the game, after this knight a4, white just played rook d to e1. And the idea here is that after knight c3, now white is not forced to capture because they are not losing the exchange. Also, a2 is very well protected, so the pressure of the knight and the queen over there is not creating any real problem. However, in this position, it is black to move, and this master found something really interesting, a tactic, or we could say a combination already, just to win the game in just a few moves. The move he played as black in this position was the surprising rook takes c1. And the idea here is that he's removing the defender of the pawn on a2, so once he plays knight c3, white will need to respond almost for sure with the capture of that knight. So after rook c1, in the game we have king takes c1, but let me show you. After rook takes, we can play knight c3 check, and if they capture, well, we already saw something like this earlier. The queen is hanging over there. But also if they try to escape with king c2, we have checkmate in 3. We start with queen a4, queen takes a2, and mate in 1 now, bishop b5. So after rook c1, in the game, king takes c1, and then this fantastic move, knight goes to c3. And now the pressure is just too much. And let's analyze some lines. The idea here is that black is infiltrating over a2, and if white tries something like a3, well, they can just continue with something normal like rook c8, putting the rook on the same line as the king, and this is going to be decisive, it's winning. But also, for example, if they capture the knight, well, then b takes c3, and now the queen is threatened, and well, after queen c2 we have this check, and the idea is that we have a pawn, a rook, a queen, and a bishop attacking one king, more or less unprotected. It's only defended by the queen, and that's why this is winning. After king d1, well, we have bishop a4 at least. Probably there are better lines over there, but this is more than enough to say that black has decisive advantage here. The second system white can try is the 4 pawns attack, and this is very aggressive. Observe, white is putting 4 pawns in the center. They are controlling many squares over there. They're getting a lot of space, but well, as you can imagine, that's more or less part of the plan. That's actually what black wants when we play King's Indian. So this 4 pawns system is not really as strong as it seems. They have a lot of center, but they don't have so much protection for that center. So in the next moves, we are going to be undermining those pawns, creating weaknesses, and the middle game is going to be very dynamic. So the game can continue castling kingside by black, knight f3, and then we start undermining and challenging white's pawns. We play here c5. In general, they need to play d5 because they are not ready to open as the king is still in the center, and we continue with our plans. We already mentioned that in King's Indian very often we want to fight against the most advanced central pawn, so moves like e6 or c6 are very normal in these positions. So we play e6, also we want to open because the king is still there. The most normal move for white here is bishop e2, we trade on d5, and after c takes d5, there are some ways to play. There is this rook e8, very interesting, but well, my favorite line is just a normal development like bishop g4, and when white castles, knight b d7, observe, this is a good position. All black pieces are already developed, and the plan for the middle game is very clear. We want to put a lot of pressure in these central pawns, but also we want to expand on the queen side. We want to move all those pawns. If we can do that, we will be opening this diagonal. We're getting a nice square here on c5 for the knight, and it's going to help us with the pressure in the center. They have more space, but it's not clear how they can actually take advantage of that space. This bishop usually is going to be traded there on f3. So one more time, the middle game is very unclear and very dynamic. There is this game by Shirov where his opponent played the 4 pawns attack. He just castled, and after knight f3 he played c5. d5 is very normal, as we said, and here we were suggesting the move e6, which is the main line, but he played something different but very interesting. He's going to play here b5. These kind of moves are very normal. Even when we lose the pawn very often, the moves b5 are going to deflect this pawn away from the center, and this is going to create other problems for white. White needs to capture on b5 and then a6. He's playing some kind of Bangkok Gambit approach here. After b takes a6, queen a5, the idea here with those sacrifices is that he's opening lines over there, so there will be a lot of pressure with all those open lines, but also pressure in the center. For example, right now he's taking the central pawn on e4, and this is very annoying for white. Observe that a normal move like bishop d3 is not going to work. After bishop d3, there is a tactics here to win or to get some nice advantage for black. So black can play here knight takes d5, discovering the bishop, and for example after pawn takes knight, well, bishop takes c3 and queen takes c3. This is check, but also we're forking over here. So we're getting the material back very soon. After bishop d2, queen takes d3, this position is clearly better, or we should say decisive advantage for black. So after queen a5, white defended the pawn by playing queen d2, which is, as you know, blocking the bishop, but they don't have too many options. They can continue, the bishop takes a6 and then e5. The knight needs to go back, knight d7, and then e6, very interesting, but the knight goes to the queen side now, knight b6, e takes f7, and rook takes f7. After knight g5 trying to get e6, well, rook f5 with some pressure on d5. Queen e3 will develop, knight 8 to d7, and after bishop takes a6, queen takes a6, and white cannot castle yet. Knight e6, and now this really interesting move by Shirov, bishop e5. And the idea here is that, well, of course white cannot capture because after rook takes pawn we are pinning, but even if white doesn't capture that bishop and they play something normal, there is a really nice hidden threat here. For example, let's assume something normal like bishop d2. Here the tactics could start by playing bishop takes e4, and the idea is that we are clearing e5 so the rook can go there. So bishop takes pawn, and after knight takes bishop we can play rook e5, and then we're pinning. White can try here knight e4, but this is not really going to work because in the next move we can play knight f6, increasing the pressure. Even when the capture is with check, it's totally fine because we just recapture, and now white is losing the queen in the next. So this bishop e5 is actually a nice move, very subtle idea, but white continued knight c7, forking, queen a5 was played, and knight takes e8. They are getting the exchange, but the game is very complicated. For example, knight takes d5 is the move Shirov played at this point, and well, probably a good move here was queen f3, but in the game white played queen d2, and this is very dubious. After this queen d2, black can just capture the knight on c3, and white cannot recapture because we have bishop c3 pinning and getting material, but they can try just castling. But at this point there is a really nice combination from black. Shirov played here bishop d4 check, the king needs to go to h1, and here there is a really strong tactics. I will say it right now, but feel free to pause the video. Shirov found a typical mating pattern over there in some variations, so he's going to play here the surprising move knight e4. And well, how do we understand that? The queen is totally hanging here. How is this a good move? Well, the idea of this knight e4 is that we are creating a checkmate position here. There is a checkmate threat, and if white accepts the hanging queen on a5, then we have checkmate in 2. We can just play here knight g3, deflecting that pawn, and the bishop is controlling u1, so after pawn takes knight we have rook h5, and this is going to be checkmate. But the lines are very interesting after knight e4. For example, even if white tries here queen d3, there is a beautiful combination here. There are some ways to win, but this move is just amazing here, queen b5. And the idea is that this queen is guarding g3, so we cannot do the same tactics, but when we play queen b5 we want to deflect it, so we can actually play knight g3 and rook h5, and the queen cannot move so easily because remember we are taking the rook on f1. For example, if white tries here queen f3, well, then we can play here, we can continue with fantastic moves here and a beautiful combination, queen takes rook. We continue with this idea of deflection, so queen takes rook and knight g3, deflecting the pawn now, and then rook h5. So queen b5 is a beautiful move. Even, for example, like rook f3 is not solving the problems, we can do another deflection. The rook has to protect here, so we deflect it over there, and then we take the queen on d3. Also, if after knight e4 white tries queen e2, we can play something similar, queen b5 again, and well, here maybe they want to try this, but then we trade, and then we check, and then we mate here on h5 one more time with that mating pattern with rook and bishop. So that's the reason why after this knight e4, white is lost and they just resigned in this position. And finally, we are going to analyze the classical variation. This is probably like the main line or the most common and popular way to play against King's Indian. So knight f3, then we castle, and then bishop e2. In this position we can play e5, and when they castle we can play knight c6. Usually here white blocks the center, and we will be in this middle game where black plays on the king side and white plays on the queen side, and that would be a very dynamic and interesting play. The game can continue knight e7, and here white can try knight e1. This is a very theoretical line for the best players of the world. The theory is actually studying here. For lower levels, it's enough to observe how black pieces move, and I show you a main line. For example, knight d7, they can continue knight d3, and then f5. As I was saying, black attacks over the king side and white will try to do it over the queen side. Bishop d2 is normal. The knight comes back now to the king side. f3, f4, c5, breaking g5. Now black will try to break over g4. Rook c1, the knight goes to the king side. Knight g6, c takes d6, c takes d6, and then knight b5, trying to get this square c7, but we're going to defend it with rook f7. Also the rook is ready to go to the king side and guard, for example, the advance g4. Queen c2 is normal. Knight e8, again controlling very well that square. a4, h5, knight f2, defending and avoiding g4, but now bishop f8 is defending very well d6, but also is clearing g7, so the rook can go over there, and we continue with the plan of breaking over g4. After a3, rook g7, we're going to stop the theory here. I just wanted to highlight typical squares for black pieces, and also the typical plans, for example with the break over g4. The plan is very clear here for the middle game. We continue attacking, and of course white is going to do the same thing over there. Something interesting here is that our attack is against the king, and white's attack is just against, you know, some pawns and some material and some squares. So in general, if we can succeed in the attack, we could be winning the game, but we should say that the position is still complicated and very unclear. There is a game by Kasparov. His opponent Piquet played classical system, bishop e2, e5, white castled, and then knight c6, and white blocked the center, knight e7, and knight e1. This is exactly the same line we were analyzing. Kasparov played knight d7, and here white played bishop e3, f5. We are threatening f4, and they want to bring the bishop to f2 after that move, so they play f3, f4, bishop f2, and then g5. Very normal in this position. b4 trying to break over c5, and now our knight comes back to the king side. c5, knight g6, also a move we have studied. c takes d6, c takes d6, and then rook c1. This plan, rook f7, defending and going to the king side. a4, bishop f8, defends and clears g7, a5, bishop d7, finishing development, controlling b5. Knight b5 was played here, and this is probably a little dubious because the knight was doing a great job guarding e4. So now Kasparov can play that move a little earlier, because if white takes the pawn, for example f takes g4, well, now we can capture the central pawn here. So g4 was played, knight c7, and then this move, surprising but strong, g3. Kasparov is very aggressive, and he's just thinking of the enemy king. The exchange is hanging, so white takes that rook, and well, he can take the bishop, but he plays first knight h5. This is very interesting because if he can connect the pawn with the queen on h4, that could be checkmate over there. So that's why he plays this move first. King h1 is more or less forced here, and now he takes the bishop on f2. After rook takes f2, this nice move, knight g3. He has the same idea. If there is a capture, the pawn is going to be on g3, and then he's going to connect the queen with that pawn, and there will be checkmate over h2 or h1. For example, after h takes, f takes, g3, we're getting the rook, and if white plays rook f1, then check and checkmate. But also if they are willing to lose the rook with something like king g1, well, we don't have to take it. We actually have mate here in some moves. For example, queen h4, this should be very strong. We are threatening check and mate. And if they play bishop d3 trying to escape over here, well, we have queen h2, but then we don't have to give the check. We can control e2 first by playing knight f4. This is a mating net, and I don't think there is a way to stop queen h1 in the next. That's why after knight g3, Piquet just played king g1, but well, now he takes that knight on a8, bishop goes to c4, and now another move I really like in this game is really interesting, really subtle, and it is the move a6. Of course, if we are attacking, we need to involve our most powerful piece in that attack, and Kasparov's idea here is that he wants to bring the queen over a7, over this diagonal, to create problems over there. In the game, queen d3, queen a7, and after b5, a takes b5, bishop takes b5. It is black to move here, black is winning. Try to find the move Kasparov played in this position to force white's resignation. I will say it right now, the move he played here is some kind of decoy or deflection, but also we need to talk about pain, because of course the queen is putting pressure over here. So Kasparov played here the move knight h1, and there is a lot of pressure here on f2, and if the king takes the knight, well, we take the rook, and this is decisive advantage for black, so white just resigned here. We're gonna see some typical middle game tactics for black in King's Indian. This is going to be very helpful because these are patterns that happen very often in King's Indian. So there are 6 positions, this is the first one, and the level is going to increase the difficulty. So black to move here, black can win. You can try to find it, I will explain it right now. Usually this bishop is going to be creating many tactic ideas. Here we can play in the first move knight takes c3, bringing the queen to that diagonal, and then discovered by playing e4, attacking knight, attacking queen, and this is going to be getting decisive advantage for black. And this is the second position, black to move, black is winning. I will say it right now, feel free to pause the video. Here there is a checkmate combination. The first move here is going to be a queen sacrifice. We are going to extract the enemy king. So we are going to play here queen takes g3, and well, the king is not forced to take it, but well, even if they don't take it, there must be checkmate very soon because we have many pieces attacking. And after the king takes, well, the mate is here, bishop e5, game over. This is the third position, black to move, black is winning. I will explain it right now. One more time, the bishop is going to be essential in this combination. The first move is going to be like some kind of attraction, but also we are going to use fork. So first move here, queen takes b2, and we are attracting the queen, but also once this pawn is not here, there will be many problems for white over the diagonal. So we attract the queen to b2, and then we have the fork with knight d3. After the king comes up, we capture that queen, and well, in this game something interesting happened. Up to now we got one pawn, but also in the game white played knight d5, and then there is another tactic move, getting another extra pawn, and it is this knight takes c4. There are many problems with the rook, with the exchange hanging over there, but it's also about the knight on d5 because there is a pin over the e file. Position number 4 in these tactics about typical middle game patterns in King's Indian is this one here, black to move. This is a game by the French master Etienne Baccarat. In this position, observe this queen on d2 is guarding both the bishop on g5 and the knight on d4. So we could say it's a little like overloaded. The knight is not really attacked right now, but it can be attacked very easily if at some point we move the knight. So that's what is going to happen. One more time, the bishop is going to create problems over the diagonal. The right move for black here is going to be knight f to e4. And the idea is that we're going to make the queen actually overloaded after that move, so we can deflect over d4 and capture over g5. So knight f, e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and f takes e4, and here now the queen is overloaded, so we can deflect by playing bishop takes d4. After queen takes d4, white can actually get the pawn back later, but it's going to be a very bad position for them. So queen takes d4 was played, queen g5, and then queen d6, but well, after rook d8, there is a clear advantage for black here. Observe the pawn structure, it's very bad. There is an isolated pawn there, but also when we analyze the minor pieces, we can see that this bishop is much better than this one, because this one is blocked by its own pawns, so the position is clearly better for black here. In the next, Ivan Cheparinov is playing as black, and he found a beautiful way to win here. Black to move, black wins. Try to find it. I will explain it right now. The idea here is that there is an important weakness here on g2. It looks like white is defending very well f3, so we cannot create any idea with our queen. However, there is one move here getting rid of two of the defenders of that square. So there is this rook takes d2, and suddenly the knight is gone and the queen is deflected, so there is only one defender of f3. After this move, the king and the queen are going to be on the fork position. So we can actually try queen f3 then, because if the bishop takes, there will be a fork with knight takes bishop, and then we are getting the queen. So in this game, black just played the beautiful move rook takes knight, and after queen takes rook, the other surprising and very strong queen f3. Now the weakness is very important, so white just needs to capture the queen, and after knight takes bishop, they are just getting the queen in the next, and this is an endgame with a decisive advantage for black. Observe, they have two knights for the rook and a passed pawn, but not only that, right now they are attacking rook and pawn at the same time, so the material advantage will be even more. And finally, this position, this one is a little tough. Black to move, black is winning. Fedorov is playing as black here. I will say it very soon, feel free to pause the video. In this position, we have these ideas of, for example, some rook takes h2, and after bishop takes, queen h4 trying to mate. But then this square g1 is going to be available, and white can play queen g1, and they could defend more or less fine in that position. So what we need to do is to change the order of the moves. We are not going to sacrifice on h2 so soon, because then if we sacrifice, g1 is available for the queen. We're going to delay that sacrifice, but we are going to increase the pressure on h2. However, the queen shouldn't go first, because after queen h4 we would need to sacrifice the queen there, and we need the queen to actually win once this bishop is not there. So the right move here is going to be rook h4, and this move is just winning. It's decisive advantage for black. The idea here is that this plan is unstoppable. Queen h6, a lot of pressure on h2, and this is just winning the game. Observe that if at some point white plays a3, we will have the sacrifice bishop takes a3. I mean, especially after the queen is there on a6, this is going to be winning. For example, if they try something like rook a2, trying to defend over the second rank, we can just play here queen h6, and after a3 we can sacrifice on a3. After pawn takes bishop, well, we just take the pawn, and here they need to sacrifice the queen. If they try to keep the queen on the board, they will receive mate. We have rook h2 and queen takes h2, that's winning. If you guys have any question, let me know in the comments. If you want to learn how to master chess calculation, check out this interesting video with the best techniques and methods. I'm sure you will enjoy it and it will help you a lot. Thank you so much guys. Like, subscribe. See you on the next.